At that time, the parents more or less decided your future. And because the situation, the economic situation was so very bad, they wanted us to earn money as soon as possible. That's why I was sent to that secretarial school, and that's when they decided, because she was so skilled with her hands, that maybe it would be a good idea if she would learn dressmaking.
Yes, this
now
was
you
my...
tell that's the background.
This happened to me because I always sew beautiful dresses for my doll. I was playing with my doll until she was already reading novels and big books. I was still playing and sewing dresses for my doll. And this was probably the idea that, and they saw that I have inherited mother's hands, which were very skillful, really. I could do anything with my hands. And so I went to learn how to sew. It wasn't a very happy occasion, but I had to do it. I was told to do it, and this will be your future. My aunt, we had a very nice aunt. She was childless. She always told me, you will see, you will have a great dress salon, and you will travel to Paris to buy models there. And so she encouraged me. So I learned the trade. I started to learn the trade.
So in the meantime, I got my first job after graduation, and after all my teachers were heartbroken that I cannot continue studying, I got my first job at a big bank. And that was again a great change, because for years, because of the recession or depression, they didn't hire young people. So I was the youngest, the only young girl at that time at the bank. Of course, there were a lot of men, and that's when I really started discovering men, not just boys, because one of my friends from that Hungarian school had a brother, and the brother had a lot of friends, so but they were only friends. It was just friends. But here, of course, there were young men who sent me flowers, who took me out. So that's when I really started discovering that I am not a child anymore, I am a girl, and I may be attractive, and that's how life started.
In the meantime, I made a course in a school where I learned how to cut material, how to make patterns, how to design. And then I discovered that's something.
The beauty of it.
Beautiful. This is something, it's a creative work.
It's a creative.
And then I started to enjoy
yes.
it. After all these years, really, I started to enjoy it. And when I could take a piece of material, cut it, and shape it, then I started to enjoy the work. And then I opened my salon, and slowly it started to, I got 2 girls to help me, and everything was made by hand, really, at that time. The machine was just, it was there, but so many things were handmade. We needed help. And so by word of mouth, customers kept coming. So suddenly, after a few years, of course it started at the apartment of my parents, which was again very small, 3 rooms and the maid's room. So in the maid's room, there was my shop.
Which was next to the kitchen.
We were sitting so like sardines, one beside the other. But after a few years, I was working with a few girls, 4, 5, 6, 7. It went up till 12 in the last year of my
In the
career.
meantime, we also discovered what was such an important part of our life, the Danube. Because every Sunday, from early summer until late fall, we went rowing on the Danube with friends. And later, one of our uncles had a motorboat, which was a fantastic thing at that time. And he also had a little cottage at the Danube outside of Budapest, which he gave us when we were already in our late teens, to spend the summers.
And he also had a rowboat which he lent us, and there we learned how to row on this.
So that was, and then swimming in the Danube, especially once we met Polly, who was a great swimmer, and he was to buy a melon, a watermelon. He swam across the Danube and then came back with the watermelon to the other side. So anyway, that was that was also a great part of our youth, our relationship to the Danube and to the mountains.
Our dances were mostly
You cannot stop her.
tango, foxtrot, csárdas. This was the Hungarian.
And waltz.
I started with the waltz.
I didn't hear
and
you.
English waltz. This was a different waltz. And this was what we danced away for hours and hours. And there was always live music. There was always an orchestra with live music. And it was just wonderful.
And that's when we had this old cleaning lady who always told us that she has another customer, a family, where there is a very nice bachelor brother of the lady of the house by the name of Louis. He would make you a wonderful husband, me. And then there is a younger man, the son of the house of the lady, who would make a very good husband to her. And then there is a very nice young girl. And that young girl, whose name was Eva, I met when I joined a hiking club. I was already working, and then I joined a hiking club. And then it turned out that she is, that Eva, she is part of that family our old lady was talking about. We became good friends. She invited me, I met her family. Then we invited her, Eva, to our house. Then she met Agi. Then she invited both of us. And when we came home, she said, "You never mentioned that Eva has such a good-looking brother." I didn't pay too much attention to him because he was my age. And the people I went out with were usually older. And that's the first time I really looked at him. That's when our relationship started. So it was really through Eva. And that was one of the great gifts I got from life.
So in 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and it was the beginning of a terrible epoch of history. But it didn't affect us personally at the time.
Because we were so very young and you were so egocentric as everybody who is very young, we didn't care too much. But then, with time, it became that there was the so-called Kristallnacht everybody knows about, when the German Nazis broke all the stores of the Jews everywhere and caused a terrible uproar. And we heard what is going on in Germany, but you always thought it cannot happen here. You always think it cannot happen here. And then came 1938. And in 1938, the Germans walked into Austria. That was the first thing and then they walked into Czechoslovakia. And that's when it really began also in Hungary to appease the Germans. The Hungarians also brought all kinds of
Jewish laws.
restrictions to Jewish life. Then the first Jewish law was brought in 1938, when companies who had I don't know how many employees could have only so many Jewish employees. And then in 1939, that was the second Jewish law, which always reduced the possibility of where Jews could work. But we still had freedom of movement. We could go to the theater, to the movies, to the parks, to everywhere. But Polly lost his job. And then he had a friend who was a great Zionist who convinced him, let's go to Israel and
Palestine.
try it.
To Palestine.
To Palestine. Yeah, at that time it was Palestine, it wasn't
no
Israel,
yeah.
because that was in 1938. And both went, it was a very adventurous way. First they went to Bulgaria. From Bulgaria they went with so-called Aliyah illegally to Israel, because then not Israel, Palestine. His friend stayed there, and he made his life in Israel. When the war broke out in 1939, September 1st, Polly came back to Hungary. He couldn't bear the idea that a war will separate him from his family and also from me, that he may not be able to come back. That was in 1939. The Germans occupied Hungary in March 1944. And that's when the real horror began. Because between March 1944 and end of November the same year, they deported 430,000 Hungarian Jews, many of whom never came back. You want to continue? And that was in March. I remember that we were with, it was on March 18th or 19th, it was a Sunday, when we heard that we were out in the country with my Polly. He wasn't my husband yet when we heard. And then, because it was so hopeless, we were waiting with Polly for the war to end and then get married. But because it looked so hopeless, we got married in April. It will be the 22nd of April, 66 years ago, in 1944. That was the... And you want to continue?